Imagine drowning, but instead of water filling your lungs, it's honey. Thick, suffocating sweetness pouring into every opening of your body while you're still alive, still conscious, still aware that this golden tomb is the last thing you'll ever feel. This isn't a nightmare. This is what happened to Persian queens who were deemed worthy of the most sacred and horrifying preservation ritual ever conceived by human hands. And before you click away thinking you've heard every dark historical secret there is to know, let me tell you something that will crawl under your skin and stay there. The honey mummification process wasn't designed to honor the dead. It was designed to trap something far more disturbing inside them forever. In the ancient Persian Empire, death was never simple for royalty. The Persians believed that the soul's journey to the afterlife required the body to remain not just intact, but alive in a way that defied our modern understanding of mortality. For common nobility, embalming with oils and wrapping in linen sufficed. But for queens, for the women who had carried the bloodline of emperors and ruled beside gods made flesh, something far more extreme was required. They called it mummification, and the process began not after death, but weeks before it, when the chosen queen was still breathing, still thinking, still feeling everything. Historical texts from the court of Darius III, fragments preserved in the ruins of Persepolis and later translated by Ottoman scholars in the 16th century, describe how a queen selected for mummification would be informed of her fate during a ceremony held under the new moon. She would be taken to a sacred chamber beneath the palace, a room lined entirely with beeswax where the air itself tasted sweet and cloying. There, high priests would explain that her sacrifice would preserve not just her body, but her wisdom, her power, and her essence for eternity. She would become more than human. She would become medicine, oracle, and relic all at once. But here's what those ceremonial words carefully avoided mentioning. The transformation required her to experience something that sits at the intersection of reverence and absolute horror. The preparation phase lasted exactly 28 days, one full lunar cycle. During this time, the queen was forbidden from eating anything except honey. Not bread soaked in honey, not fruits drizzled with sweetness, but pure, undiluted honey, harvested from specific regions of the Zagros Mountains where bees fed on particular wildflowers believed to hold sacred properties. She would consume roughly 2 pounds of honey every single day, and nothing else. No water, no wine, no sustenance of any kind except this golden substance that would eventually replace the very blood in her veins. Within the first week, her body would begin to change in ways that witnesses described as both miraculous and deeply unsettling. Ancient Persian medical texts, preserved in fragments now housed in the British Museum, detail the physical transformation with clinical precision that makes the horror somehow worse. By day 7, the queen's sweat would begin to smell sickeningly sweet. By day 14, her tears would taste of honey, and her saliva would thicken into a substance that could be harvested and was considered especially potent for healing rituals. By day 21, her skin would take on a translucent quality, as if the honey was beginning to preserve her from the inside out, replacing her cellular structure with something that could not decay. And by day 28, when the final ceremony began, she was no longer entirely human in any way we would recognize. If you're still watching, if you have turned away from this truth that history tried to bury in the sands of forgotten empires, then hit that subscribe button right now, because what I am about to reveal in the next section crosses a line that even the darkest historical accounts struggle to describe. The Persians documented their rituals with obsessive detail, and what they recorded about the final moments of mummification will change how you understand the lengths ancient civilizations would go to in their pursuit of immortality. The queens knew what was coming. They had 28 days to contemplate it, and not a single historical record mentions one ever trying to escape. On the 28th night, when the queen's body had been saturated with so much honey that she was barely conscious, drifting in and out of awareness in a state that physicians today might describe as hyperglycemic delirium, the final ceremony would begin. She would be carried to a chamber where a massive stone sarcophagus filled with honey waited, its surface reflecting torchlight like liquid amber. But here's the detail that makes this practice transcend mere preservation and enter the realm of something far darker. The queen was placed into the honey while her heart was still beating. Persian texts describe this moment with a reverence that barely conceals the horror beneath the sacred language. The queen would be lowered into the sarcophagus slowly, inch by inch, as priests chanted prayers that lasted for hours. The honey, heated to exactly body temperature so the shock wouldn't kill her too quickly, would envelop her completely. First her feet, then her legs, her torso, her chest, and finally her face. Witnesses recorded that some queens would struggle in those final moments, a primal instinct overriding weeks of spiritual preparation, their hands breaking the surface of the honey one last time before being gently, firmly pushed back down. Others would simply close their eyes and let the sweetness claim them, their last breath creating a single bubble that would rise to the surface and pop, marking the exact moment the transformation became irreversible. But death was not the end of the process, it was barely the beginning. Once the queen was fully submerged, once her lungs had filled with honey and her heart had stopped its futile, struggling against the thick liquid that had replaced her blood. The sarcophagus would be sealed with beeswax and covered with prayers inscribed in ancient Pahlavi script. Then came the waiting. For exactly 100 years, the sarcophagus would remain sealed in a sacred tomb, guarded by priests who dedicated their entire lives to maintaining the ritual silence and darkness required for the mummification to reach completion. Every new moon, honey would be poured over the sealed lid as an offering, absorbed into the wax seal, continuing the preservation process even through solid stone. The mathematical precision is what makes this truly disturbing. The Persians had somehow calculated that 100 years was the exact amount of time required for the body to transform completely, for every cell to be replaced by crystallized honey, for the flesh to become something that could survive indefinitely without decay. Modern biochemists, when presented with these historical accounts, admit that the high sugar content would indeed create a hostile environment for bacteria, that the osmotic pressure would draw moisture from tissues, that theoretically, if every condition was perfectly maintained, a body could be preserved almost indefinitely. But the Persians weren't satisfied with simple preservation. They believed that after 100 years, the mummified queen would possess properties that bordered on the supernatural. When the century had passed, when every priest who had witnessed the original ceremony was long dead, and new guardians had inherited the sacred duty, the sarcophagus would be opened. What emerged, according to accounts that span multiple dynasties and sources, was something that looked like a queen carved from amber, her features perfectly preserved, her skin translucent and glowing with an inner light, her body weighing almost nothing, as if the honey had replaced her substance with something lighter than flesh ever could be. And here's where the practice reveals its true purpose. The reason why queens underwent this horrifying transformation willingly. The mummified body was not meant to be buried and forgotten, it was meant to be consumed. Small pieces of the preserved flesh, dissolved in warm water or wine, were believed to cure any illness, heal any wound, grant wisdom and longevity to those who consumed it. Persian nobility would pay fortunes for even a grain-sized portion of mummified queen. And the practice of consuming these preserved remains continued for centuries across the ancient world. Trade routes carried portions of mummified bodies from Persia to China, where they were called renjong huang, human yellow, and valued more highly than gold. The queens who underwent mummification knew this would be their fate. They knew they were transforming themselves into medicine, into relics, into substances that would be divided and consumed by strangers for generations after their death. And they did it willingly, because in Persian culture, this was the highest form of immortality a woman could achieve. The practice officially ended sometime in the 14th century, though accounts differ on exactly when the last mummification ceremony took place. What we know for certain is that by the time European travelers began documenting Persian customs in detail, mummification had become a carefully guarded secret. Mentioned only in whispers, its practice moved so far underground that most Persians denied it had ever existed at all. Today, no authenticated mummified remains exist in any museum or collection. Though rumors persist of bodies preserved in honey found in archaeological excavations, immediately seized by governments and removed from public knowledge. Whether these rumors are true or merely the echoes of a practice too disturbing for modern sensibilities to acknowledge, we may never know. But here's what keeps me awake at night about this entire practice. Every account, every fragment of text, every whispered story passed down through generations mentions one consistent detail that historians still cannot explain. When the sarcophagus was opened after 100 years, when the priests looked upon the mummified queen's face, her eyes were always open. Not the sunken, hollow spaces you'd expect from a century-old corpse, but preserved, glassy, staring eyes that witnesses swore seemed to follow their movement across the room. The Persians believed this meant the queen's consciousness had been preserved along with her body, trapped in eternal awareness inside her amber prison, conscious, but unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except watch as pieces of her body were carved away and distributed across empires. Whether this was true or merely the superstition of terrified priests staring at a perfectly preserved corpse, I'll leave you to decide. So here's my question for you, and I genuinely want to know what you think. If you were offered true immortality, if you were told that sacrificing your body to be consumed by others would guarantee that your name, your essence, your influence would survive for thousands of years, would you take that trade? Would you let them seal you in honey while your heart still beat, knowing you'd become medicine, legend, and warning all at once? Drop your answer in the comments below, because this isn't just ancient history. This is a question about what we're willing to sacrifice for the desperate human dream of never being forgotten. And if this story has lodged itself somewhere dark in your mind where it will wait until you're alone in the quiet hours, then you understand exactly why these rituals were hidden from history. Some truths are too heavy for daylight,